In my mind, the Notre Dame fire was no accident. Investigators claim it may have been due to an electrical problem. Others blame the Muslims. However, I don't believe it was either. So if it wasn't a worker's negligence, an electrical short circuit, or a Muslim targeting the historic monument, what actually happened on April 15th, and why? My theory is this. The fire was intentionally set in order to have the cathedral's renovation repairs paid for by other countries, and additionally was a political move to boost Macron's popularity and to reunite France. Now, this may sound far-fetched, but it makes sense when you know information that surrounds the Notre Dame fire. In 2016, it was reported that the cathedral was in dire need of an urgent structural overhaul. Gargoyles, pinnacles, flying buttresses, and the spire are just a few of many of the architectural features that needed renovated. The condition of the cathedral, especially under the effect of pollution in the last decades, had strongly deteriorated. Gargoyles, which perform an essential role in projecting rainwater away from the building, were either falling off the cathedral or disintegrating, causing the archdiocese to use plastic PVC pipes in their place. The church's flying buttresses, primary forms of Notre Dame's structural support for the whole building, have also been in desperate need of repair over the years. The stone has been breaking off in small chunks, some of it even crumbling at a finger's touch. If even one of the structural pylons were to fail because of the damaged stonework, the consequences would be disastrous. Additionally, water regularly seeped through cracks in the lead-covered spire, weakening this wooden frame. Acid rain, wind, snow, and other elements were also eroding the flying buttresses and their decorative pinnacles that are built with delicate limestone. The pinnacles also play a dynamic structural part as they help anchor and stabilize the flying buttresses, which bear the weight of the cathedral. Victor Hugo's book Notre Dame had inspired a restoration for the cathedral back in 1844, but low-quality stone and even cement were used since France at the time could not produce the quantities of high-grade material that the job required. This being so, it's understandable how the building has reached this level of deterioration. Also, because 200 keys had been needed in order to access all the stairwells, corridors, and rooms of Notre Dame de Paris, it was impossible for anyone to know the full extent of the crumbling construction until a few years ago when all of the locks in the cathedral were standardized. The Archdiocese of Paris were finally able to fully inspect the cathedral for the first time in more than a century. The closer inspection revealed stone walls held up by 100-year-old planks of wood, interior supports with rot, and nearly impassable stairwells. They realized France's most beloved and visited church was just a few short years from serious irreparable damage. These conditions were the result of decades of neglect and decay, due in part to an awkward arrangement between church and state, which made it unclear who held the responsibility for the building's upkeep. Neither the government nor the French could afford the steep renovation costs. All the required repair work was estimated at $185 million, but the French government, which owns the cathedral, pledged only $50 million over the next decade for the project. That left another $135 million that needed raised for the renovations. The French government was already overwhelmed by other monuments that need maintenance, and many French people felt that by paying taxes, they've already done enough to help the church. There was even a quote from a news interview that stated, "Nobody wanted to do the work in France." As far as the idea to start charging entry to help fund repairs, when asked, the priest said he couldn't because it's not a museum, it's an active church and a place of grace. To remedy this financial plight, in October 2016, the Friends of Notre Dame Foundation was established by the Archdiocese of Paris to help finance the repairs of the state-owned monument after it became clear that the annual €2 million to maintain the building wasn't nearly enough to prevent it from deteriorating beyond repair. The group said on its website that there is no part of the building untouched by the irreparable loss of sculptural and decorative elements, let alone the alarming deterioration of structural elements. The cathedral is in desperate need of attention. Structural problems have plagued the old building for years, including dangerously eroded stone, broken gargoyles, and fallen balustrades. Finot told the newspaper the situation was spinning out of control. President of the Friends of Notre Dame de Paris Foundation, Michel Picot, stated in an interview with France 24, "The flying buttresses are in pretty bad state, and we can't afford them falling down because it would risk the structure of the whole cathedral. It's urgent." All of these statements were from 2017. The 856-year-old Cathedral Notre Dame had been undergoing renovations after cracks began to appear in the stone, sparking fears that the structure could become unstable. CBS News' Roxane Sabiri reported in March 2018 that years of rain, snow, and pollution had eroded the flying buttresses, which again propped the cathedral up. Check out this video.
A foundation in France hopes Americans will donate money to help save one of the country's most iconic historic buildings. The Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is home to some of Catholicism's most important relics. They include the crown of thorns said to have been worn by Jesus. Conservationists say the building is in desperate need of repair. Roxana Saberi got rare access to parts of the 855-year-old cathedral that are starting to deteriorate.
Look closely, you'll see. This majestic medieval monument is falling apart.
You see a piece of the pinnacle here, and you see two pieces of the railing.
Michel Picot is raising money to keep the cathedral from crumbling. On the roof, he showed us walls chipping, stones stapled together, and Gothic gargoyles used to drain rain replaced with plastic pipes.
Here what we see is a wooden railing which has been put to replace the original railing which was here.
Years of rain, snow, and pollution are eroding the flying buttresses that prop the cathedral up.
Therefore, there's a risk to the whole cathedral
exactly.
falling down?
Yes, exactly.
The cathedral is, for now, safe to visit, but it has reached a tipping point.
We are behind Notre Dame in the backyard. These are stones that have either fallen off the cathedral or were at risk of falling off. There are hundreds of them here. The hope is to fix them up and put them back.
But the Archdiocese of Paris says it can't afford all the fixes, estimated at $185 million. The French government, which owns the cathedral, has pledged around $50 million. That leaves a bill of $135 million. To raise the rest, Picot helped launch the Friends of Notre Dame of Paris Foundation. It's working to find private donors in France and across the Atlantic.
We know that Americans are wealthy, and so this is clear that we go where we think we can find money to help restore the cathedral.
Some Americans may ask, why should we help pay to fix your national monument?
Notre Dame de Paris is not a Paris monument or a French monument or a European monument, but it's really a worldwide monument.
Other degraded parts of the cathedral are more threatening and could destabilize the building, like the aging flying buttresses. Notre Dame's stained glass window supporting structure is weak, and they could collapse in case of a storm. To carry out a series of urgent and less urgent repairs, at least 100 million euros are needed. The French state gives Notre Dame 2 million every year. That's clearly not enough.
In 2018, a more serious push for money began as repairs became even more urgent. There were statements such as, "We need to repair the ruined stones, we need to replace the joints with traditional materials, and this is going to be extensive." We hope it will last forever, Picot says, but it cannot last forever without this renovation. Despite the fundraiser being publicized multiple times over the next 3 years, they were only able to raise about 1/4 of the funds they needed. Notre Dame didn't wait for the funding to be in place for renovations. Instead, the government published a call for bids, and $6.8 million worth of stopgap repairs were underway as of 2019. Although the flying buttresses represented the greatest structural risk, the church officials wanted to tackle the spire first, which, if you remember, is right about where the fire took place. Bidders had to take into account the cost of complying with a thicket of regulations that accompany work on a historical landmark. The construction site required fire safety inspectors to make daily rounds checking every piece of electrical equipment, so in my mind, an electrical problem would be highly unlikely considering these regular safety checks. A detailed plan for various disasters was mandatory, and workers weren't allowed to leave tools on the site either. Welders were required to check that their work had cooled off 2 hours after finishing. They even had someone checking the attic 3 times daily. With these kinds of safety measures being taken, especially daily rounds of checking electrical equipment, the media's claim that the fire was an electrical short seems even more unlikely. As if not enough of the details surrounding the fire are strange, get this, Jean-Michel Lignoux, an architecture expert, said it was unusual for a single contractor to win all 3 tenders, scaffolding, roofing, and woodwork. He stated, "Usually there is a separate company for each." It was also said that all safety devices and procedures were respected. They were on a tight schedule, though. The government wanted the scaffolding completed by July 2019. That would allow work on the roof and framing to begin a month later. However, by the start of April, work on the scaffold appeared to have fallen behind schedule. It had reached the base of the spire, but the repair work was becoming more challenging. Now, there's no way of knowing for sure, but it's possible someone in the church may have had a hand in orchestrating this along with the president. It's difficult to say who all would have been involved, but they needed the finances, and being a single contractor actually won the bidding for all 3 tenders, not as many people would have had to be in on it. Notre Dame is truly a historic religious monument, and it's horrible to think someone would even consider setting it on fire intentionally. Basically, $6.8 million were being used in an attempt to save a building at risk of collapsing in the near future that required at least $185 million worth of fixes. If it came to losing the building completely, or causing a tragedy that would support a politically favorable outcome on top of saving the iconic Parisian monument by getting worldwide funds to repair it, the latter is certainly more plausible than an unheard of freak accident or Muslim arson. Every detail seemed to have fallen into place too conveniently, and it seems apparent that there was a conscious effort to avoid anyone from being hurt. The goal was just to damage the cathedral. Remember what I said about Macron potentially having a hand in it as a political move to accomplish his efforts to reunite the people of France? After the fire, he did in fact urge the public to unite and turn the national catastrophe into a moment of French unity. Let's look at some of the details regarding the incident. April 15th, 2019. The fire started 5 minutes after the cathedral had closed, which also happened to be after all the workmen had gone home for the day. A fire alarm was triggered at 6:20 p.m., but due to an alleged computer bug, the fire was shown in the wrong location and they didn't find anything. 20 minutes later, at 6:43 p.m., a second alarm sounded and flames were found in the attic. Here's where things get interesting. The attic is located just under the spire. The 16 copper statues of apostles and evangelists that normally sit at the base of the spire had been removed for a cleaning just 4 days prior to the fire. This was the first time those religious statues had been brought down in over a century. Something else that was ironic. A spokesman for the cathedral reported that when a fire alarm went off, they instantly recognized it because they had practiced a fire drill just a couple days prior. Very timely. Also, it's worth noting the fire happened just days after the renovation project began, so not much work would have been lost, and claims of a renovation fire accident is a believable cover-up. That same evening, President Emmanuel Macron was scheduled to have a major speech at 8 p.m. to address the Yellow Vest protest and reunite the French. Think back now to 9/11, when the U.S. government allegedly engaged in a self-attack to unite the American people together to go to war in Afghanistan against al-Qaeda. When tragedy strikes, people band together in a way they otherwise wouldn't. Interestingly enough, YouTube accidentally categorized videos on the Notre Dame fire with 9/11 conspiracy theory videos. They brushed it off, claiming it was a mix-up with their algorithm. So we have 2 supposed computer errors surrounding the Notre Dame fire. Interesting. Back to Macron. It seemed that he already had a game plan and hit the ground running when the fire occurred. Just a couple hours after the fire started, before it was even put out, Macron announced that the next morning they would be launching a worldwide fundraiser to raise money to rebuild Notre Dame Cathedral, and skilled architects had been summoned globally within 24 hours of the fire. 2 fundraisers that had been repeatedly promoted over the last 3 years hadn't been able to raise enough funds to save the quickly deteriorating masterpiece. They hadn't been able to get the Americans to pay for it. But in the moment of unexpected shock and tragedy, condolences and pledges from around the world poured in and people rallied together to save it. Wealthy French who previously did not wish to help with the funding for the church and Americans poured millions into the cause. There were donors worldwide, and within just a day and a half, $1 billion had been raised for the rebuilding of Notre Dame. If this was a stunt to get others to pay for the monument's renovations, they had instant success. President Macron postponed his speech for a few days, by the way, which should now have a much greater impact and be far more effective in his effort to reunite the French, being people are still recovering from the tragic fire at Notre Dame, which has left so many heartbroken and in shock. President Macron promised to rebuild it within 5 years and make it even better and more beautiful than before. Very possible with a budget that now exceeds $1 billion. He also promised to have the cathedral completed in time for the 2024 Summer Olympics, which are scheduled to take place in Paris, France. I imagine having the Notre Dame Cathedral rebuilt for this occasion will be a huge economic boost for the country. It's also interesting to note that European elections for the members of Parliament, which are held every 5 years, will take place May 23rd through May 26, 2019, just about a month after the Notre Dame fire took place. Also, can we just address the fact that before the fire was even completely out and no fire investigation had been conducted, officials immediately insisted it wasn't arson, but that it was very likely caused by the renovations and was an accident. This was also emphasized the following day in a myriad of news reports, in an attempt to combat conspiracy theories that flooded the internet from those believing the fire was actually intentional. According to the German news site PI News, every day in France, 2 churches are desecrated. They reported 1,063 attacks on Christian churches or symbols like crucifixes, icons, and statues in France in 2018, marking a 17% increase from the year before. And France has seen a spat of attacks against Catholic churches since the start of this year, vandalism that has included arson and desecration. It's fascinating how quickly they were willing to rule that out without any investigation having been conducted on the fire at that time. Because the building was not pronounced structurally sound, a few more days had to pass before fire investigators could even try to determine the cause. If you're wondering how someone could bring themselves to burn something so historic, you may be interested to know that several features about Notre Dame as we knew it are not actually original. To point out a few changes, The well-known spire, the first part of the building to collapse in the fire, was not actually part of the original design, but was constructed in the 13th century, probably between 1220 and 1230. It had become battered, weakened, and bent by the wind over 5 centuries, and finally was removed in 1786. During the 19th century restoration, Eugene Viollet-le-Duc decided to recreate it, making a new version of oak covered with lead. There was actually conflict in regards as to whether the spire should even be permitted, as it altered the historic architectural value and did not fit renovation standards. Also, in the wake of the French Revolution, all of the original bells were destroyed and replaced, except for just one. The transepts were subsequently remodeled. A gabled portal was added to the north transept, crowned by a rose window, which was considered such a success that it was repeated some 15 years later on the south transept. The original buttresses were deemed at some point not strong enough and were replaced by larger ones in the 14th century. Even after completion, changes continued. The Gothic style fell out of favor in the Renaissance, and tapestries were installed to cover the church's internal pillars and walls. During the reigns of King Louis XIV and Louis XV, alterations were made to comply more with the classical style. The altar was rebuilt out of marble, stained glass windows were changed out for clear ones, etc. This is just a shortened list of adaptations Notre Dame has underwent over the course of its history. We are just experiencing one in our time, but it happened in such an unexpected and shocking way, it feels devastating. Take a look at this budget chart on the Friends of Notre Dame Foundation page. As you can see, everything that was destroyed in the fire were parts of the cathedral that were previously in urgent need of repair back in 2017. Another intriguing aspect to all of this, it was stated that it was common knowledge that the attic was the most vulnerable part of the building. It seems very convenient that it happened to start at a central point in the center of the incredibly flammable cross-shaped timber roof, as that placement would allow the fire to spread more quickly than it had it started at one end of the roof. A former chief Notre Dame architect is also skeptical about the fire being an accident, stating, "Ancient oak doesn't burn like that." Take a look at this article. Benjamin Mouton, who served as chief architect of historic monuments in France and oversaw restoration work of Notre Dame until 2013, says it's extremely unlikely an electrical short circuit took place and that it would take a huge effort to ignite the ancient oak of the cathedral. "Oak that is 800 years old is very hard. Try to burn it," he said. "Old oak, it is not easy at all. You would need a lot of kindling to succeed. It stupefies me." He proceeded to say, "In the 90s, we updated all the electrical wiring of Notre Dame, so there's no possibility of a short circuit. We updated to conform with contemporary norms, even going very far. All the detection and protection systems against fire in the cathedral." Mouton also revealed that there are 2 watchmen on duty around the clock who monitor for any chance of fire, adding that the technical and security measures taken to protect monuments like Notre Dame are unprecedented. A news article that came out 3 days after the fire reported that the last artworks inside the cathedral were removed, with art conservationists confirming none suffered major damage in the fire. As of April 19th, 4 days after the fire, a poll found that French President Emmanuel Macron's approval ratings have risen to levels not seen since before the Yellow Vest revolt erupted last autumn, with most French feeling he rose to the occasion of the Notre Dame fire. The poll also found that 54% of French think Yellow Vest protests should be put on hold in the name of national unity over Notre Dame. So to quickly recap, Notre Dame was in desperate need of major repairs, or it was at risk of collapsing in the near future, but the church and government lacked the funds to repair it. Numerous attempts had been made since 2016 to get American citizens to pay for the cathedral's repairs, but they proved unsuccessful. French President Macron had low popularity ratings of 26%. Voting for members of the European Parliament was quickly approaching, the Yellow Vest protests were getting out of hand, and he was struggling to reunite the French people. Statues were removed from the cathedral's roof only days before the fire. A fire alarm drill was practiced a few days prior as well. The fire didn't start until after closing time. An alleged computer bug showed its location at the wrong place initially. A new fundraiser, this time worldwide, was launched less than 24 hours after the incident. Architects were summoned immediately, and plans were launched to have the cathedral rebuilt within 5 years, in time for the 2024 Olympics. Macron's major speech, scheduled for that evening to address the protests to unite the French, was postponed until a few days later. And Macron's popularity ratings have risen dramatically because people were pleased with how he responded to the fire. If the burning of the Notre Dame Cathedral was indeed orchestrated by Macron for economic and political gain, everything fell into place very quickly, and whether it was the church or someone else involved, they were extremely successful in everything they hoped to accomplish. Thanks for watching my take on what actually was behind the Notre Dame fire. Please leave a comment to let me know your thoughts and if you agree.